Welcome back to our monthly conversation with Konstantin Samoilov. He is, of course, one of the most respected voices on YouTube about what is happening inside Russia. And what's really useful, I think, for our purposes, he keeps a close eye on Russian media, at least that part of Russian media that can be trusted. That's the opposition media, and maintains some connections with people in Russia. And this is incredibly important because the Russian system has become very opaque and very easy for propaganda to manipulate. So having information from the inside is incredibly important. Konstantin himself, of course, is not in Russia. He cannot be there for obvious reasons and does not know when he can return. Please make sure you support the work that Konstantin and I do through the various mechanisms on the channels. Make sure you're subscribed and help support the content. Konstantin has been demonetized, as we mentioned before, so of course he's very much grateful for any support that the audience can render. As of course am I to help support the events that we run, and there's more of those coming up in May, going back to Ukraine, running events in Lviv, Kiev, and Odessa. So thank you to everyone who is supporting to make that happen. Konstantin, welcome back.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for such wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, as always.
Always a pleasure, and we had, I say, a fantastic lengthy chat prior to this. So we're going to try and bring some of the themes we explored in that conversation into this recording as well. And the things we've been talking about for more than 2 years now. Actually, I looked, our first video was quite early on when I established the channel. So I think it's more than 2.5 years we've been talking. And many of the things we predicted are now coming to pass. One of those is the exhaustion of liquid funds from the Russian state, almost near exhaustion of the sovereign wealth fund. This is going to create a cascading series of issues. In fact, it already is, isn't it? Including inflation. But what do you think the major impact of Putin running out of money is actually going to be?
Well, there are many impacts, and I can't really just isolate one. Militarily, Russian army is becoming weaker. It's becoming increasingly difficult to recruit, to get new recruits, to recruit more. We have recorded the first time in the history of modern Russia when one of the provinces of Russia decreased bonus for signing up for the military, signing the military contract, Yakutia. Okay. Before that, it was just more increase after increase. They simply don't have any more money to pay. And I think, it's just a speculation, but I think that what really happened was, the provincial government, the Ministry of Finance of Yakutia, knocked on the Ministry of Finance of Russia door and asked to be reimbursed. And I said, what? Reimbursed for what? That you paid from your budget. What does it have to do with us, with the federal budget, Again, I can't prove it, but I have a feeling that's what's going on, okay? So, and then other provinces most likely will be following the suit. So that's one impact. I don't see any potential for further advancements of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine. I think the Russian army is exhausted, financially, exhausted technologically, exhausted equipment-wise, and people-wise. Another huge impact is that, well, Russian economy has finally started landsliding. Okay, it was declining for 3 years, and this is it. It's at the point of no return. There is no money left, liquid money to patch up holes. Okay, Russian Fund for National Welfare has been used up. There's very little left there in Chinese yuan and gold. And gold is not a very liquid asset these days. in Russia. Um, the Russian economy is entering, well, has entered recession. Um, some say stagflation, some say recession. I'm going to be talking more about that. What's the difference in my um, futures live streams? It has, I think, it has entered recession, and this is it. We are at the point where the machine has stopped. It's broken, and pieces of it start falling out. It starts falling apart. We are seeing the first bankruptcy of one of the top Russia's banks right now, and this is just the beginning. The entire financial system is under huge strain. The inflation is rising. The living standard of the Russian people is dropping very fast. Every week, they feel more and more pressure. Well, they actually have less and less money because prices are rising. And this is where we're seeing the results of the invasion that happened over 3 years ago. Um,
Of course, the
that's
government
Russian
doesn't
people
care,
are
does it? I mean, the government doesn't care about the living standards
no,
of normal
absolutely
people,
not.
but it does care about the banks and it does care about the control it can exercise over so-called oligarchs. I mean, they don't have independence, but they do have potentially some ability to cause mischief for the regime. They want to be able to still have money available, resources and assets available to keep that elite kind of on side with the war. Is this going to start falling apart if they do not have the money to do that?
Do you know how a human being, a man, freezes to death?
Yes,
Slowly, slowly. First, feet and hands, fingers, toes, because brain starts, turning off the body parts that are the farthest from the brain. Okay, then they go hands, arms, legs, body, upper body, and all blood, all warmth is around brain. It's all focused on the brain, and the brain dies last. Okay, it just freezes. But everything goes before brain, and then the same with the Russian government. Russian people, of course, they don't care about Russian people. Well, why would they? Russian people don't have a say in who is in power. They are de facto they voters only on paper. Okay, they have been stripped of the rights. They are not the force any longer. So why would they care? Why would the government would care? Okay, and then when we talk about the government, we have to understand that we're talking about Vladimir Putin and his close circle. Everything else is just service. Everyone else is a servant. Okay, and the servants are disposable. So Vladimir Putin will not let government agencies fall apart. He will hang on until he can't keeping everything together anymore. Okay, that's what I think what's going to happen. Because if the system that is the foundation of his power starts falling apart, his power he will just be thrown, down from his throne. Okay, and he's going to be doing everything possible to keep Sberbank alive, to keep VTB Web alive, Russian banks, the big ones, Russian military industrial complex. Definitely, he will be feeding Siloviki well. He will be trying to secure the foundation of his power. Okay, for as long as he can. This is what I think is going to happen. Everything else will go. Commercial banks, no one cares about them. Um, Russian small businesses, medium-sized business, private businesses, they're not going to be bailed out. Who cares? they will freeze to death, figuratively speaking, first. And then they will be trying to save the system for as long as needed, as much as they can.
And of course, we're seeing some of the evidence of this in, as you said, the first sign that the payments for new soldiers to come on board is going down. And whereas there are some so-called pockets, I wouldn't call it excellence, that's the wrong word, but like the Soviet system, you do have some advanced areas and some advanced battalions who are mastering drone warfare on the Russian side. However, these are small kind of pockets and they can only be used selectively. The skills to operate sort of drones at scale and refine these techniques seem to be incompatible with, the system, the hierarchy, and so on. So the standard technique is still, send vehicles out into no man's land where they get blasted, probe enemy lines, making absolutely sort of pointless kind of attacks. It's in the human aspect aside, which of course is terrifying, it's also very wasteful militarily. And maybe in the Second World War, there are endless supplies of people you could use for these kind of tactics, which Zhukov favored. Now, they simply won't be able to afford to replenish the stock of people they need to align with these tactics. So, do you see Russia's ability to project military force declining significantly? Because that has huge implications, possibly even a collapse of, Russian lines. Well, neither of us are military experts, but it seems if we apply these economic ideas to the way Russia runs the military, there is some form of collapse potentially on the horizon.
Um, I'll just give you one real life example. Tank Armata, the infamous Armata tank, the technological marvel. It was sold to Russian public as a tank that could solely destroy like half of enemy's army because it's so technologically advanced. It's such a high-tech breakthrough, know-how that Russian brilliant military engineers came up with. And it turned out that they spent over 200 billion rubles engineering, designing, and manufacturing this tank armata. And there were two prototypes, and they even took part in the V-Day parade so many years ago. And the armor was made out of plywood and painted black, as it turned out. There is no tank armata. Okay, it exists on paper, but 200 plus billion rubles have been spent, used up. Okay, and I don't see any examples of any new armaments. Okay, Putin was trying to sell Oreshnik as super new rocket, the ballistic missile. And it turned out that Oreshnik was designed by the Soviets back in 80s. It's an old technology, at least at the base of Oreshnik. There is nothing to show. And if we dig deeper, this is a system crisis in Russia because there are no engineers. There are no good schools that teach um, engineers. They have no places to learn from. Everything is filled with corruption. Okay, the Russia's goal on every level, all the bureaucrats, the officials, to steal federal money that the federal budget spends. There is no incentive for private companies to sell to the Ministry of Defense. Um, I don't see any prerequisites for any kind of technological advancements of Russian armed forces. Okay, Russian military industrial complex is outdated. It does produce products, manufactures tanks, old ones designed in the USSR, planes, old ones designed in the USSR, and then nothing new is there to show. So they're not going to win the war technologically, and the only tactics you rightfully mentioned is throwing people, throwing people forward and trying to advance that way. And they don't have enough people any longer, and obviously they cannot recruit people fast enough. They've run out of people, those who wanted to sign up. But it doesn't mean that they will not have people in the future. I think that Russia is on the brink of big change that will come in May. On May 9th, Vladimir Putin will announce some kind of victory. I don't know what exactly will be sold to Russians as victory, but something will be. And then after, perhaps right then, on May 9th, perhaps later, Vladimir Putin will turn the direction of the country from what officially now is, just life as usual, business as usual, to military mode, some kind of war mode. And people will not have much of a choice, but they will be forced to go and serve. And they will be thrown to the front lines. I think that's most likely scenario for Russia for the next few months. And that's also a way out of economy problems, because it's one thing when you have, well, at least on paper, free economy, and then you have to answer why government policies don't work, or why they fail, why they turned out to be mistakes. And that's another thing, was when you control the country in a military style, then you don't have to answer anyone anything. Okay, you just do as you please.
You can create a completely fictitious life, a sort of Potemkin facade of shops full of goods, while people's lived experience is very different. It becomes a complete command Soviet militarized economy. And we see signs of militarization. I mean, from someone, obviously, my experience in Russia was in the 90s, where, the pioneers and all this sort of stuff, suddenly ceased to exist. Um, and the militarization of society just sort of disappeared overnight almost, including, the need to strip down weapons in schools and, do nuclear test drills and that. That just suddenly disappeared overnight, as well, of course, as the Marxist-Leninism sort of tutorials that everyone had to go through of your age. But it seems there's been a dramatic return to the militarization of youth, right from sort of kindergarten upwards. And we see, so much of it appears as kind of kitsch. And I think, as with the Soviet Union, there's an element, there's a Russian word which doesn't quite translate into English. There's a kind of poshlyst, there's a kind of kitsch attackiness to a lot of the sort of militarized culture we see. And it can be amusing, but it's also incredibly disturbing. Having children inculcated into the idea that the world is full of violence and all you can expect from life is violence, trauma, abuse, and humiliation, because I think that's at the heart of all of this. And, stick in me uniforms and teaching them how to fight and kill from, very, very early age. We see these signs, increasing, I think, in Russian schools and universities.
I think it can only be seen as funny to those who have never experienced that. Okay. Um, it can be seen as funny to only to an American from Texas who just, watches videos on TikTok or YouTube, or, an Englishman in London who's never been to Russia, never lived a day in the USSR. yeah, but to me it's not funny because I have gone through three stages. I was born and grew up in the USSR, and I was indoctrinated. They started indoctrination at the first grade. Okay, 1982, when you're 4 years old. Oh, no, 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 that's kindergarten. But 6 years old, first grade. So my indoctrination started 1984. First stage was I had to become Oktyabryonak. That's the grandchild of Vladimir Lenin. Okay, and they designed very, very um, standing out red stars, and then they put red star right here, and they made me proud. And oh, I'm Oktyabryonak now, and I'm a member of this tribe. And then, of course, I become the pioneer. That's the next stage, and I became. Well, I did not become Komsomolets. That was the last year. Yeah, I was growing up, and Komsomol just it was disbanded when it was my time to become a member of Komsomol. Thank goodness. And I remember that system fell apart overnight, literally. I lived through it. You saw it, Jonathan. I lived through it. 91, and it was very, very strange time. But what replaced this indoctrination, this fake society was complete freedom. We were free to do whatever they wanted to do. And the freedom lasted for quite a few years. And now we're going to another stage. For me, it's stage number three. That's returning to back to the USSR. That's indoctrination 2.0. Okay. Only it's digital. It's much smarter system than was in the USSR, and much more sinister system. I certainly wouldn't want for my children to to to, to be in that system. It's terrible. What they are doing right now is, and what they were doing in the USSR, and it's the same kind of playbook, only different tools. When they put, like you said, when they put the uniform, when they put that nice shiny star right here, when you put, this military uniform and the military hat on top of your head, they start conditioning you to sacrifice yourself. Not just your life, to sacrifice freedom. They start conditioning you so you become a small part of a large group, of a machine, of the society, okay? And they start putting all kinds of ideas into your head that it is an honor to sacrifice you. If it's okay, it's if its sacrifice is good for the group, for others, that's the highest honor you can get. Even you can even sacrifice your life. You don't live it in vain, then you'll be a hero. And in reality, all those sacrifices they're needed to the ruling class to stay in power, to continue being the ruling class. That's all. Okay, and it's absolutely terrible. It's not funny to me when I see kids at school in uniforms. It's not funny when I see the classes so-called of patriotism, of the lessons of the important. My kids went through those classes. Dasha was obliged to attend them because she spent 2022 in Russian school. Michael was in kindergarten, but already people came and talked to them. They showed them cartoons, and then they taught them how to sing patriotic songs. Okay, so my kids experienced that just a tiny little bit, and I'm so glad that they're not in Russia any longer. To me, it's not funny. I don't smile. I don't laugh when I see that. I cry.
It's a form of it's more than brainwashing, it's brain poisoning, isn't it? And
It's changing your DNA or something. It's something making you a hybrid. That's you cease to be human being because once they put something inside of your brain, it's incredibly at a young age, it's incredibly difficult to shake it off, to change.
That's absolutely right. I mean, this is one of the challenges I think that is actually being faced by the Ukrainian children that were taken, deported, abducted. And no one knows the final numbers, but it's thought there are as many as tens of thousands. And here, there's another process where you don't just take a sort of, a clean brain, as it were, and program it. They actually have to deprogram the Ukrainian children to make them not forget their homeland and culture, but to start hating their previous identity and country. And I heard a story last night. It was a case study on this, and one of the children, and again, this it's both more difficult and in some ways easier with younger children, but with teenagers, they have enough self-reflection to think about things, but also they're easily manipulated at a sort of sensitive age when they're a teenager. And this particular case study was a Ukrainian teenager who they managed to get out of Russia. His release was actually negotiated by the state of Qatar. But it took 9 months. It took 9 months for him to stop, repeating sort of obvious lies and sort of propaganda that he'd been fed. So it shows, I mean, it gives some hope that it's possible to deprogram, but it's also a challenge because if it takes sort of at least 9 months to start making inroads into that programming, it's a terrifying prospect and terrifying scale of work. Even if those children are returned, what you do with Russian children who are embedded in that system and don't know anything else, I don't think anyone really has the solution to that at all.
We have to look back in the history. My generation, I was indoctrinated at a young age, and all kids around me were indoctrinated. And I think that a lot of Russians are silent now. A lot of Russians look away. A lot of Russians don't want to think of what's going on in Ukraine as a result of what they were placed in their minds at the young age. Okay. Younger generation are children of my generation. They're more free. Okay, they ask questions. They they don't like when the adults tell them what to do. Okay, um they ask questions. That's the main thing. And my generation, people don't. That's the difference when you're indoctrinated and not. They When I was growing up, you see, you had no choice. You couldn't opt out of being a part of the society. And if you did, if you started asking questions or criticizing the society, then you were labeled as traitor, and no one wanted to be a traitor. Okay, and this is exactly what's going on right now. So, John, I don't have much to add. It's tragedy when they do that to the kids. That just breaks their lives for a long time, for forever, for good.
There's no clear solution to it, but I'm glad that some people are trying at least to experiment with that and to get those children home. Now, let's turn back to the economy because you and I have this sense that Russia is not even running out of money. Its economy is imploding. The inflation rate, the real inflation rate, which is likely between 20 and 30%, not the published rate of inflation. So we have galloping inflation, stagflation. We have all sorts of issues kind of going on. We have infrastructure falling apart, etc., etc. It seems to me, however, Putin in his mindset is so malignant. Has so much loathing and hate. I mean, he genuinely, this isn't just geopolitics. I think he has a real genocidal hate of Ukraine for some reason in his head. He wants to expunge it. So on the one hand, he might have a sort of conscious understanding that this war is no longer sustainable and that he cannot reach those goals physically. He may even have an understanding that carrying on this path could lead to some form of collapse or event that takes things beyond his control. I think there's some awareness of that within his regime, but it seems he cannot let go of this need to inflict violence, this need to control, coerce, and eradicate Ukraine. Is he sort of, are we seeing him pre-programmed now into a course of action that's going to lead to something far more, catastrophic in terms of the state of Russia? Obviously, it's already catastrophic for Ukraine and Ukrainian lives, but it seems he's pre-programmed. He cannot get off this track of violence and conquest.
Um, just one step back to your previous statement. You said that um, there is no medicine for what is being done to kids. Okay. I think there is some hope, and we have to look for what Germans did in the late 40s and in the 50s, because they were able to get better, to heal, to overcome what happened to them in 30s and 40s. So I think there is some hope, and then we definitely can learn from their experience. That's all I have to say. Um, Other than that, I don't know what else we can do. And going back to Putin, um, it's really hard to understand why he hates Ukraine so much. It's really we can't get into his head. There are different theories. I've heard so many from different experts. Okay, and then I think he just doesn't like Ukraine, hates Ukraine. I don't know, but he has strong feelings against Ukraine because Ukraine is everything he's afraid Russia would become. Everything that going towards Europe, going towards democratic values, going against tyranny, having elections. If you look in Ukraine, there's always a huge fight at every political election. Okay, and then Putin hates that because there's always a risk that if he competes against someone or someone against competes a bit against him, then he might lose his brushes, his power. All he
He's never
cares
actually
about.
competed in a real sense, has he? He's never actually participated in a real competitive election. The
Yes,
dice
he
have
has.
always been
Yes, he
loaded.
has. Yes, he has. 1996, he lost. He was in
96.
charge
Yeah.
of Anatoly Sobchak campaign,
Right.
and he lost. The Sobchak lost due to Putin doing such a lousy job. I think he is afraid of competition
Yeah.
because he lost miserably once. Okay, it cost Sobchak his life later, and it cost the careers of all around Sobchak, including Putin. Okay, and it was just some dark luck that he was brought to the Kremlin and made the president 4 years later. But I think that he has strong feelings against Ukraine because Ukraine, he fears Ukraine. He fears Ukrainian people. He fears Ukrainians showing example to Russians. Okay, and I think now it has gone too far already because once the two countries get into a war, that's just this becomes incredibly tragic and incredibly bad. There are no rules right now. There are probably different feelings and emotions. I think he's threatened. He feels threatened by the laws loose in the front lines in Ukraine, and that's a different set of feelings. But before, I think that That's what he was fearing.
And
I
yeah,
could be wrong. It's really
yeah.
hard to get inside of his head, but that's what I think.
But it seems that he's not going to give up this path of violence. So it's almost as if that's kind of baked into his behavior now. And we've talked about Trump a couple of times, and of course, what we're seeing unfold this week, and we have to mention what happened last night, probably the largest combined missile and drone attack on Ukrainian cities, certainly since 2022 and the start of the war. Huge, huge unleashing of violence, and that's not surprising. There's a sense there of retribution. There's a sense of triumphalism because Putin thinks that Trump is acting to his benefit, and partly Trump is by insisting that Ukraine recognize Crimea as Russian. Trump is aligning himself with the idea of normalizing crimes, normalizing theft, normalizing deportation, normalizing ethnic cleansing, terror, all these things that were unleashed, not just in Crimea, but in Donbass and other territories, which have hideous echoes of the Second World War. Trump is aligning himself and seeking to normalize these to get a sort of quick and easy peace. Of course, Ukraine is not going to submit to that. So Putin thinks, look, the US, whether it's a formal asset of mine or not, they are acting to my benefit. And that gives him a sense of triumphalism, which always leads to him unleashing extraordinary violence, which he has done. There is another risk here, which is that the US might now say, do you know what? Screw this. Not only are we not going to be involved in negotiations, that's looking pretty likely, but we're going to start working on Nord Stream 2. We're going to start working to remove airline sanctions to help Russia. We're going to start cooperating on minerals deals. Hell, we might even build Trump Tower in occupied Crimea. That maybe is going a little far, but it's not beyond imagination that that's something that Trump dreams of. At this stage, is there anything the US can actually do to save Putin, or really is there very little, even if they act in Russia's benefit to help save this regime?
Okay, there will be a lot of speculation on my side from now on because the situation is unclear. Um, First of all, I don't understand the motives of the American side, the American administration, of why they're doing what they're doing. But I don't want to think that the US administration will be helping Putin just for the sake of it, or just because they're upset with Ukraine or with Zelensky. I just don't even want to accept this possibility, Jonathan. I'm sorry. I think this is so evil and insane that it just can't happen. And I hope it will not happen. Okay. I think what they can do is just walk out of this situation, I mean, the negotiations, and forget about the war, forget about Ukraine, and stop support. Stop money coming, stop the weapons coming, and that would be pretty darn bad. Uh, and I think that's where the situation is heading towards. And then Trump has set himself up. It looks like such a very straightforward trap that he's put himself into. Um, I think that his interests lie not in ending the war, but looking good for the American taxpayers, for American voters who voted for him, who he promised to end the war in 24 hours. He came out, he said, okay, look, I was just joking. Okay, I was being satirical about it. 24 hours, but I'm working hard on that. on stopping it. Okay. The question here is not 24 hours any longer. The question here is, can he stop the war or he cannot? And it appears that he cannot. And then we saw in the first term on Donald Trump that a similar situation happened with North Korea, if you remember. He promised that he would normalize North Korea. And when he couldn't, obviously, he couldn't do that. He just walked away, forgot about it, acted as if the situation never existed. This is what I'm afraid he's going to do. He's going to walk away from it and concentrate on domestic problems in America and act as if the war in Ukraine has never existed. Okay, and I think that's going to be pretty darn bad. Um, as of Trump Tower in Crimea, the Moscow Times a couple days ago came out with a news from the insiders, and the Moscow Times is usually right on things. Okay, it's rarely makes mistakes. That the Russian side has offered Donald Trump to build a skyscraper in Moscow in the financial district called the
Yeah.
Moscow City,
Paid for
and
by
and call
oligarchs.
it and call it the Trump Tower. I don't believe that's gonna happen because if it does, the world would just turn upside down for me. Uh,
Great target
okay.
for Ukrainian drones, though, wouldn't it? The symbolism of that would
I
be.
don't think it will happen.
No, I
That
don't
will
think it
happen.
will happen either.
Yes, but I think that the negotiations have stalled, obviously. And one thing I don't understand is that what Donald Trump is blaming Vladimir Zelensky for not having aces in the negotiations and being stubborn, okay, and losing, and he would lose Ukraine in 2 to 3 years. But wait a second. I think there's something is missing here. Vladimir Zelensky was elected by the Ukrainian people, and they trusted him. He represents the people of Ukraine. He represents their opinion, their desire, and their desire is to keep Crimea, not give it up. Okay. So if Vladimir Zelensky does that, he would be betraying his voters, right? He'll be committing a crime. And he's certainly sticking to what his people think is right.
It's also
How can he
unconstitutional. He doesn't actually
e-
have the executive power to even make that decision.
exactly how can he be blamed for that? It's just insane.
That's one insanity piled on another. And the last topic for today is another form of insanity, and one which I dare not even really expose here, but I think it's a possibility. It's not an impossibility, and even that is a form of insanity. It seems that two things are converging. One is propagandistic narratives that are now, and Peskov has done this, and we've heard this from Solovyov over and over for years, but now you're hearing it more widely. And this is the idea that there's this thing called Eurofascism, that somehow Europe has become Nazi and is emulating the Second World War. This is the same kind of rhetoric, the same patterns of rhetoric that we saw prior to the invasion of Ukraine. And looking at it as something that is just horribly clownish, etc., is one angle. But actually, I think it's worth taking this seriously because, the denials of wanting to mount an invasion before Ukraine happened reached a kind of fever pitch before they happened. We're now seeing the same pattern of denials that Russia is interested in the Baltics, denials that there's any of this, but we're also seeing this rhetoric around so-called Eurofascism. And Lithuania has just unveiled something which would have been inconceivable a few years ago, and that is an evacuation plan for the entire capital city of Lithuania in the event of a Russian invasion. And of course, we know Potentially, there are some divisions massing around the area where the Suwalki Gap begins. I mean, this is a terrible thing to even contemplate, but there is a possibility in the next sort of 12 to 24 months we could see a Russian annexation of the Baltics.
When I hear someone saying, "Oh, Konstantin, don't pay attention to that. He's not to be taken seriously." Okay, I don't like that. I always take everything seriously what comes from Russia, from Russian officials, from Russian propaganda personalities, because they're not free to say what they say. They are following narrative, and the narrative definitely comes from one place. We know what that place is. Um, I take the threats or just the talk of year of fascism very seriously. Actually, it's really what is funny for me to see how they changed the narrative. The narrative itself is serious, but just a little bit before it was Nazis in the USA, fascists in the USA, the Satanists in the USA, nor good people, LGBT in the USA, the bombs in the White House and all of that. And now all of a sudden the USA turns out to be the great country again. The great president, the great country, friend of Russia, definitely. Look, shaking hands, Witkov smiles at Putin, makes small talk, drinks tea, whatever they drink. Now they're friends. We never said the USA was bad. Was it just a mistake? It was unfortunate event that we paused, not stopped, but paused our relations. Now we have to, the USA will be sending more people to open the embassy in America, in Moscow, American embassy in Moscow. And then we'll be sending more people to, enlarge the embassy in Washington, D.C. Okay. Now everything's fine between Russia and America is good again. Europe is bad now. Before, Europe was okay. Just, they're vassals of the USA. What do you want from them? They're not free in their political will. They're just lost. We'll help them. We'll tell them the truth. The Germans, good guys. They're selling, they were buying gas from us. The Austrians were always our allies. And now, all of a sudden, just like that, with a click of a button, they are fascists. Year of fascism is on the rise. They are the real enemies, you see, not the Americans, the Europeans. And I take that very seriously. I think that Russia will not annex, will not invade, will not take a chance at the Baltics for one simple reason. Russia does not have military might. It does not have resources, at least at this point. I don't know what's going to happen after May 9th. I don't know if it's going to Russia is going to be turned completely to placed on a military track. If that happens and Russia weaponizes as the country, then in a few years down the road, that could be possible. At this stage, at this situation, next year, Russia will not take Lithuania. It simply cannot. But we'll see how events will fold out.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully, the audience will find a lot of value in the conversation. I certainly have. A lot of it is incredibly enlightening, especially around the economy and the banking crisis that is happening partly behind closed doors. So I recommend people look out for material about that. And of course, watch your videos where you're going to go into more detail on what is unfolding there. For today, as always, I'm immensely grateful. Konstantin, thank you so much for coming back on.
Jonathan, thank you for having me. Thank you.